Hi, my name is Arshnar. Today I'm just going to be talking about some of my observation reflections for my practicum that I'm going to be doing in West Park Middle School for grade 6 science and math. So I'm going to be just going through those three observations that I have reflected on. To start off, based on my first observation, the question that I answered is, how did students demonstrate their learning? The grade 6 students demonstrated their learning by solving problems on Math IXL as well as doing textbook questions for extra practice. In grade 6 science, students were asked to do a quiz online on Google Forms, or for some students, they were given a Scantron to fill in their answers to the questions booklet. And the students also demonstrated their learning by asking clarifying questions when solving prime factorization problems. And so some examples were, do we further break down the question into its factors? And moving on to the physical education class, students demonstrated their learning by being actively involved in doing burpees, jumping jacks, running laps around the gym. And if students were listening, then they would know the rules of the different games that were being played, which would allow them to demonstrate their learning by being more involved in the game. And in my second question, I'm addressing the question of, in what ways could students have been more active participants in this lesson? My mentor teacher could have given the students a quick 5-minute break after the science quiz so students could focus better. For example, I saw one student who was always tired and he was sleepy. He only participated in class if the mentor teacher guided and sat next to him. So in my opinion, giving that student a break would definitely prove to be beneficial because he already can't focus for long periods of time. So by giving him a break, he can free his mind from the content related learning and just relax for a few minutes. And so moving on to my second observation reflection, another question that I have addressed is, what instructional strategies were used and were they effective? From my observation, I've seen that some instructional strategies used by my mentor teacher involved a combination of individual work, group work, and student-to-teacher collaboration and interaction. For example, when the mentor teacher was teaching order of operations concept in math, he designed an activity that involves students to move to different corners of the room depending on which operation to perform first in the equation or in the question that he wrote on the board. And specifically, he had 4 designated corners with addition, multiplication, addition, subtraction. And what I found most unique was the mentor teacher had a random number of students pick a card from a deck. And based on the cards the students picked, he created an order of operations problem. And so this activity was effective as it involved student-to-student interaction as well as teacher collaboration with the whole class. In other words, something that I really liked about this activity was the fact that it was student-centered. This kind of activity is a great way for teachers to gather formative feedback. Not only does this kind of activity help provide constructive feedback, but it also is a great way for teachers to see if students have achieved the specific outcomes. And it gives them the opportunity to figure out how they can further enhance their teaching to support their students' learning. And so it also is a great way for teachers to give feedback to students so that they can see what concepts students are struggling with and outcomes that they might need to focus more on or adjust their timing. And in another activity, he gave students a slip with an integer on it, and then he instructed the whole class to find partners who were opposite, similar, and different from their numbers. And afterwards, in their partner groups from the last activity, students were instructed to write a real-life application example on the whiteboard. And so afterwards, the mentor teacher discussed these examples with the whole class. And this instructional strategy was very effective because it involved peer teaching. And as we learned in this class, based on Madeline Hunter's lesson planning steps, the best way to show mastery is through peer teaching. When students teach other students, because they're applying their learning and they're teaching what they have learned to other students, so they're enhancing their learning. And peer tutoring is a great way for students to get to know and interact with their classmates. And as reiterated in Heather's class, building relationships is the most important. And so this gets students to build relationships with each other and to get to know them. Another strategy that I found effective was incorporating humor when teaching concepts. For example, if students went into the wrong corner, then the mentor teacher asked their reasoning behind their decision, and then he sneaked in a joke to make sure students weren't really feeling disappointed or embarrassed or have low self-esteem. So that was a way to motivate students to think hard. And something else that I have noticed is that the mentor teacher held students accountable. For instance, when students were leaving at the end of the day, he told them to clean up around the classroom, to stack chairs where they should be, or leave the floor spotless before they could leave for the day. And so this holds them accountable and is a great way for students to learn to take responsibility for their actions. The second question that I'm addressing is, in what ways was the lesson developmentally responsive? I've come to understand that the mentor teacher has different roles, with one of them being an inclusive as well as a developmentally responsive leader. And that is definitely something that I'm looking forward to applying in my future classroom and teaching. Another way that my mentor teacher created the lesson or learning developmentally responsive is based on differentiating the product for some students based on their students' learning profile. For example, on test day, some students were given the option of completing their trees and forests quiz on Google Forms, while other students were given the option of completing their quiz on Scantron. And I find that this is an effective way because it's student-centered and the primary focus is on the learner's needs. And as the Teaching in Middle School book justifies, positive school or classroom environments can help young adolescents by bringing changes in their self-esteem. And so to elaborate more, students feel better about themselves and their ability to cope in the middle grades. And so therefore, by giving students the option to write tests in whichever format they're comfortable in, ensures that they can cope up with the class content while also having high self-esteem. And the mentor teacher asked the students along the way if they had any questions while teaching a lesson on the trees and forest unit. And so by asking questions, the mentor teacher ensured that the lessons were developmentally responsive by clearing any misunderstandings of students, supporting them emotionally as well as cognitively. And if students were stuck on any questions that he asked, he would provide hints. But he didn't really give answers immediately. And so by doing that, he wanted to stretch students' cognitive thinking and to encourage them to think outside and to think beyond. My third question in this observation was, what did you learn from observing the delivery of this lesson? Well, I learned that direct instruction should not really be the focus of the whole lesson. Incorporating group activities is a must because it gets students moving and active. And so I can relate to this because I personally enjoy playing and participating in activities that involve moving around and getting active. And so my mentor teacher incorporated different activities in his lesson, such as having students move to different corners of the room, depending on which operation to do first in the order of operations activity, as discussed above. So that was pretty cool that I found that. So my third reflection was I generated student interest, right? How was it generated? Well, student interest was generated as the teacher had station rotations, presentations for sustainable development for the science unit of trees and forest. And in this assignment, students were asked to design a map for sustainable development. For example, students were given different categories to consider with different amount of hectares of land that they should give. And so the categories were included forest, mining company, store, river, campground, ranch, cabin, ski resort, railway. And so this way, this activity was conducted. The teacher had planned pairs of presenters and pairs of audience. And so the presenters rotated around the room after 6 to 7 minutes. And so once students had seen 4 presentations, then the teacher switched the presenters and audience. And so based on the activity, student interest was generated since the students were randomly chosen and paired as a group. Therefore, students learn to take ownership over their learning. And this also creates a wonderful opportunity for students to link and apply their real-life stories and experiences. And this type of authentic assignment opens doors for students over what they could potentially do with their future as well. And so it's a really good strategy or technique that teachers can apply to have students think more cognitively and more in terms of it's also developmentally responsive. And my second question is, what did you learn from the lesson today? Well, I learned that a lot of students really enjoyed the presentations, going around to different presentations and rotating. However, there were some students that seemed worried and anxious. Like one student just started crying, even though he and his partner were prepared. And so he was just anxious. And so from my observation, something to do differently for next time would be to maybe remind students that the teacher decides on the final marks of the assignment, not the students. Students experience anxiety when they assume that their classmates are giving the mark because they feel that they'll be judged by other students, and so they feel insecure. And so a way to avoid that would just be to have it clear and make sure that students are comfortable with each other. And it goes back to the idea of building relationships with students and ensuring that students understand and understand that they're confided. Whatever they do, it's going to be confided with the teacher, right? So they don't have to worry about that. And so overall, most if not all students gave a lot of constructive feedback to their peers, such as offering constructive feedback. And so I found that was really helpful because students learn lots. So yeah, these were my observation reflections. Thanks for watching and listening to my reflection video. I'm very excited to teach the grade 6 students, and I'm looking forward to the practicum experience.